So earlier today, when I led off, I mentioned the achievement gap. How many folks are familiar with what that is, with achievement gap? So I can't really see anything out there, but if I could, I'd see a number of your hands rising. So the achievement gap is what we see in today's public schools, where some kids show up at school in kindergarten ready to learn, and other kids aren't at all prepared to learn. And what has happened is, by the time these kids are in third grade, in many cases, their educational fate and their career fate is before them. And the success rate of those individuals who can't compete at a very, very young age, we can predict who's likely to drop out of high school, who is possibly headed into the incarceration system and things like that. If you want to know how a kid is likely to succeed, ask their kindergarten teacher, and they can predict with great regularity how different children who come into their lives are going to succeed or not. So we have been working on this issue at the Bay Area Council for some time, and that's why we want to focus on this today. We want to talk about early learning and what happens to children at a very young age. More important than understanding what happens, what we can actually do about it, because we think we have enough information now, and this is only in the last few years, where we may be able to influence this outcome and thus be able to impact the achievement gap without remediation, without kids finding their way into middle school and high school unable to read, unable to do basic math, and then at great cost and with little success trying to get them back up to where they should be. So today we have an incredible panel on this subject, and I'm going to start with Alison Gopnik, who is a professor of psychology and philosophy at the University of California, Berkeley, a renowned author of The Philosophical Baby, The Scientist in the Crib, and other influential books on cognitive development. Professor Gopnik presents evidence that babies and children are conscious of far more than we ever give them credit for, and they engage every sense and spend every waking moment discovering, filing away, analyzing, and acting on information about how the world works. Her work draws on psychological, neuroscientific, and philosophical developments in child development research to understand how the human mind learns, how and why we love, our ability to innovate, as well as giving us a much deeper appreciation for the role of parenthood. So without any ado, please welcome Professor Alison Gopnik.
Thank you. Thanks so much, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Let me start out by saying, I got into this not as someone who cares about babies, though I do, but as a scientist. And as scientists, we ask questions. And here's one of the first questions that we ask. Why is it that we have babies at all? Okay, not the obvious answer that you're thinking about right now. But here's the big question. We human beings have a longer childhood, a longer period of immaturity by far than any other species. My son is 25, and at least until they're 25, we're still paying tuition checks for them. Now that's a puzzle. I mean, babies are basically useless. They're not helping to bring in any income. They're not even very good at helping to clean up the house. Why is it, in fact, arguably they're worse than useless because we have to put so much time and energy into just taking care of them and keeping them alive. So the question is, why, from an evolutionary point of view, would we have this extremely long childhood? And the answer that evolutionary biologists have discovered over the last couple of years is this. If you look across a very, very wide range of different animals, you see a striking correlation between how long a childhood an animal has, how large the animal's brain is, and how smart they are, and particularly how good they are at doing things like learning and innovating. And the poster birds for this relationship are, for example, the New Caledonian crow is a crow that, like other crows, is incredibly smart animal. Can do things like learn how to use a tool to get food, smarter than most primates are. And in contrast, with apologies to any chicken lovers in the audience, that other bird, our friend the domestic chicken, is basically as dumb as a stump. So it's very good at pecking for grain. It's not very good at doing anything else. And it turns out that the crow babies, the crow fledglings, are fledglings for as long as 2 years for these New Caledonian crows, which is a very long time in the life of a bird, whereas the chickens are mature within a few weeks. And this isn't just true for crows and chickens, it's true for birds, it's true for mammals, it's true for marsupials, it's true for the entire animal kingdom. Now and we're way off on the end of that distribution. Why would that be? Well, the answer that biologists have proposed is that if you use a strategy, the kind of strategy that we use or that the crows use, a strategy of learning and innovation, if you're in a variable environment and you have to learn how to do new things, that's a very powerful strategy, but it has one big drawback. And that big drawback is that until you learn what you need to learn, you're going to be helpless. So you don't want to have the mastodon be charging at you and be saying to yourself, a mastodon, maybe a slingshot or a spear. You actually want to have done that learning and innovation before you actually have to face the things that you need to do. And childhood seems to be evolution's way of solving that problem. So childhood gives you a protected period, a period where you don't actually have to do anything except just explore and learn as much as you possibly can. So you can think about childhood as really being like the R&D division of the human species. So children are the ones who are designed to do the kind of blue sky, the brainstorming, do lots of exploration, do lots of learning, and then we're production and marketing. So we adults take all those things that we learned when we were children and actually put them to use to do the things that we need to do. So we're the best example on the planet of this strategy. We have a long protected childhood, but literally that childhood is for learning. That's what babies are for. Babies are there to learn as much as they can about the world, and particularly to explore and to innovate. Now, that wonderful, effective strategy comes with a cost, and the cost is what biologists call parental investment. So these are animals from Australia. On one side, there's a particularly adorable Australian animal called a quokka. And on the other side is a Virginia opossum. Quokkas and possums are about the same size, but the quokka babies stay in the pouch for twice as long as the possum babies. And more relevantly here, not just the mother, but the father and the other adult quokkas are involved in investing in taking care of the babies. So there's a big investment just among these little cute Australian animals in their babies. And in contrast, the opossum, I think even human mothers feel a little bit like that opossum looks sometimes. But the opossum, in contrast, has lots and lots of babies, relatively little parental investment in those babies. And the quokka brains are twice as large as the possum brains, and the quokkas seem to be much smarter. So the trade-off seems to be, if you want to have smart, innovative, exploratory adults, you need to have a lot of investment in them when they're very young children. And the quokkas seem to have figured that out, even if the United States government hasn't. Now, if that evolutionary story that I was telling you is right, you might expect it to be reflected in neuroscience and brain development. And it turns out that that's exactly right. So this is a picture, a famous picture, showing the number of brain connections as children develop. And what you can see is that across the brain, there's this early period in which many, many new connections are being formed. It's when the brain is what neuroscientists call plastic, flexible, changeable. And then there's a point where the connections that have been used the most are retained and strengthened, but then the connections that aren't used are what's called pruned. They just kind of disappear. And what I want you to notice in this slide is that that point is before the age of 5. So in some sense, by the time we're putting children in school, most of that learning has actually already happened. And another thing to notice is that that curve is different for different parts of the brain. And it's particularly late for the sort of executive prefrontal part of the brain. And that's often seen as a problem. It may also be that that late development of what we call executive function actually, again, reflects this trade-off between having an early period of wide-ranging exploratory learning without having to actually plan or do very much, and then this later period where you take what you learned in the early period and actually put it to use to do the things that you have to do. All right. So given this picture from evolution and this picture from brain science, we might predict that babies and young children would be equipped with really powerful learning mechanisms to accomplish this task of learning as much as they do. And in fact, that's exactly what we've been exploring in my lab over the past 20 years. Why is it that if babies or children are so smart, why have we always thought they were so stupid, right? Why did we not realize just how smart they were? And part of the reason is because we've been asking them to tell us what they know in our language instead of their language. So if you ask an infant, whether they understand the relationship between causation and conditional probability, they're not going to look terribly smart. That'll be true even if you look at a 3-year-old. So what we had to do was get children to tell us what they know by looking at what they did instead of looking at what they said. And the way that we do this is with a very simple little machine. This is the Blicket detector. It's a box that lights up and plays music when you put some things on it and not others. And with this very simple device, we can actually explore how the children are learning. And what we've discovered is that they're using a lot of the same techniques that the very smartest scientists are using. So for example, even very, very young babies are analyzing statistics. Now that may sound really surprising if you've ever taken a statistics class and you know how hard it is even for grown-ups to do statistics. But here's the sort of thing that babies can do. This is a brand new experiment, literally hot off the press from our lab. So what we did was we showed 24-month-olds, so these are babies who aren't just barely 2, just barely sort of walking and talking. We showed them this little machine, and we showed them that when you put a red block, a Blicket on the machine worked 4 out of 6 times. When you put a the machine lights up, and then a little marble comes out of that side dispenser. So the machine lights up, you get a marble. Then we showed them that when you put the blue block on, it also works 4 times, but it doesn't work 8 times. So if you were doing the probability distribution analysis, a good statistician, you'd say, okay, the first one is actually a better bet than the second one, even though they're both activating the machine the same number of times. Now again, these are 24-month-olds, right? So they're not talking very much, let alone adding and subtracting. But internally, it turns out that they do the math, and they pick the red one. And when we ask them to make the machine go, they pick the red one instead of the blue one. And this is only one of many experiments showing that even very young children are looking at the pattern of evidence around them and analyzing all the patterns, all the complicated statistics of that evidence, and using it to figure out how the world around them works. Children also do another thing that scientists do, which is to do experiments. Except that when they do experiments, we call it getting into everything. So here's a clip from Christine Laguerre's lab with a little boy trying to figure out our Blicket detector.
This makes that light up the box.
And what she did was to just ask him, just gave him the blocks and the detector and said, why did this happen?
Nothing. This one's lighting up and this one's not. So that means it's making this light up. I don't know.
Now, this is where I think he really feels like a scientist.
Oh, it's because this needs to be like this, and this needs to be like that. That's why. Why the boxes are the wrong way?
What should we do now?
Oh, because the light goes only to here, not here. Oh, the bottom of this box has electricity in here, but this doesn't have electricity. It's lighting up. So you need to put 4. So you need to put 4 on this one to make it light up and 2 on this one to make it light up.
Okay, so aside from the fact that that little boy is kryptonite cute and articulate, and a video says more than 1,000 words, when you actually do careful studies, he's quite typical of what 4-year-olds are like. If you give 4-year-olds a problem, let them loose, let them play, let them explore, they try out hypotheses and test them in the same way that scientists do. And in fact, in a study we've just completed in our lab, which you might have read about in the New York Times, it turns out that our 4-year-olds are actually doing a better job of learning unusual hypotheses than adults are. So they're actually, as you can see with this little boy, he tries 5 different hypotheses in 2 minutes. And it turns out that 4-year-olds are actually doing more of that kind of wide-ranging exploration than grown-ups are. In other systematic experiments, we can show this kind of wide-ranging exploration. What happens when you actually start introducing teachers into this mix? This is an experiment that one of my postdocs did. And what they did was they showed the child this kind of complicated toy, and there are 4 interesting things that the toy can do. It can squeak, you can look at the mirror, the light lights up, there's music. And they presented the kids with the toys in 2 different ways. The first time what happened was the experimenter came in with a toy and said, look, this is my toy. I have no idea how it works. It's really weird. She accidentally knocked the squeaker and it squeaked. And then she said, okay, I'm leaving. You can just play with the toy. When she did that, the children explored and they figured out all the things the toy could do. In the other experiment, almost the same, she came in and she acted like a teacher. She said, this is my toy, and I'm going to show you how my toy works, and she pressed the squeaker. Then she left the room and left the children with the toy. Well, they pressed the squeaker, and then they pressed the squeaker again, and then they pressed the squeaker again. And the children never got to the other kinds of solutions. Even with 4-year-olds, they were already sensitive to, here's what the teacher wants me to learn, and that characteristic preschool exploration just didn't happen in the same way. So teaching is really a double-edged sword, especially with preschoolers. Let me end up by segueing into what we're going to talk about in the panel. This is all very great, cool science, but what does it tell us about what it is that we should do? Well, what we've seen is that these babies and young children are really designed to learn the things that will be the foundation for the rest of their lives. But unlike the quokkas, in the United States, we have the highest rate of child poverty in the developed world, 20% and rising and growing. And we're strikingly unlike other developed countries in that we don't have policies and programs like paid maternity leave or health visitors or subsidized childcare that can actually give the children that protected space, that protected enriched space in which they can do all of the things that they need to do to learn. So what we're going to talk about in the panel is what can we actually do so we can let those incredibly brilliant young scientists among us, 100% of them, and not just 50 or 60% of them, actually do the learning and the innovation and the exploration that we're going to need in the future. And now maybe we can move to our panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. That was great. Thank you. So now let me help introduce the panel. We have 2 tremendous individuals from here in the Bay Area who are 2 of the top child advocates I've ever met. And I think you will really appreciate hearing what they have to say. So first is George Halverson. George is the chairman of the California First 5 Commission. and he's been the chair of the Bay Area Council's Early Childhood Education Committee during his time at Kaiser Permanente, where he was the chairman and CEO. He's written more books than anyone else I know. He has been a tremendous leader with us on early childhood education and my and our inspiration on looking at children at a much younger age to see if we could break the achievement gap where it actually begins and exists. An extremely persistent fellow. I'm really happy to have you as the head of the First Five Commission, and we're really happy that Kaiser Permanente continues its leadership with us on early care. The other person who's going to come up is Jim Steyer. Jim Steyer is CEO and founder of Common Sense Media, which I think you've all probably heard of, and founder and chairman of the Center for the Next Generation. Way back in 1988, Jim founded Children Now, and he is a one-person child advocacy movement, a true teacher's teacher. And if you look at the education reforms, the good ones that are taking place around our state and around our country, Jim is at the forefront of all this, and he does it in kind of a quiet way. Well, sometimes he's quiet, but he hopefully won't be quiet today. These two gentlemen and Allison are going to have a conversation, and the place we'd like to get to is to talk about where this is going. We're in this very special moment. We have a big opportunity, and I'm going to let them tell the story. So thank you for participating, and look forward to having you up there. Thank you. Thanks, Allison. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. I'm going to make a few comments before the panel. What's the very best predictor for who's going to end up in prison by age 18? You're close. It is not third grade reading levels, although that is a very high predictor, and the people at the bottom end of the continuum there have a 70% higher chance of going to prison. The best predictor is the number of words in a kid's vocabulary in kindergarten. So the kids who have very small vocabularies by kindergarten end up not being able to read, they end up dropping out of school, they end up getting pregnant at a higher rate, they end up using drugs at a higher rate, and they definitely end up in prison at a higher rate. And you can predict with a very high level of accuracy by age 3 which kids are going down that path. And you can predict at a high level by age 3 because the primary neuron development in the brains of children happen in those first 3 years of life. That's when the brains are growing. You just saw some marvelous science and heard about some marvelous science. But the neuron development happens immediately. It happens before birth. Some of the studies have shown that the kids who are a day old can tell the difference between different languages, the language they heard in utero and the language they hear when they get the scanner attached to their brain. The learning happens at an incredibly early age, and the neuron development happens, and if you exercise the brain of the children, then the brains are strong. And if you don't exercise the brains of the children, the brains are not strong, the brains are weak. And so it's critically important to get that exercise, and it's critically important to get it in the first 3 years. And you get the exercise by interacting with the children, by reading to the children, by talking to the children, by singing to the children. The human brain is programmed to interact with other human beings, and when that interaction is going on, the neuron connectivity happens. And if a kid just watches TV and doesn't have that interaction going on, that part of the brain doesn't light up and the connections don't happen. So you can't just put a kid in front of a TV and have the brain grow. You have to be interacting with the child to have that part of the brain activated. A TV will entertain the child. It's a pastime for the child, but in terms of stimulating neuron connectivity, you have to have the child interacting with another person. And if that interaction happens, you get a marvelous outcome. And if it doesn't, you don't. And what we know is that most parents don't know that science. We did at First Five some focus groups. We did a lot of focus groups with a lot of people looking for young mothers and young fathers who knew that science. And what we found was that none of them knew that science. Almost no one had any sense at all. People had a sense that reading, talking, singing to your kids at an early age was a nice thing to do to make the kids feel good. But no one had a sense that it's the right thing to do to make kids smart. And when we told that to people, they got really excited about it. When we told that to people and said, you know what, you could exercise your child's brain, you could have a smarter child. Overwhelmingly, the parents want their kids to graduate from school, to do well academically. All the parents love their children, all the parents want their kids to do well. And when we told them about the things that could be done, there was a lot of energy about that. And they said, please tell us that and share that information with more people. And so we're doing some of that through First Five. Now, the Bay Area Council has a committee that's been working on this for a couple of years. The First Five Commission is also working on this. There's some collective agendas going forward. And part of the goal is to get to the point where we have 90% of the mothers in California who have children 0 to 3 understanding the opportunity that exists for their children's brain. And when you look at where we are now, when 70% of the people in jail either read poorly or can't read at all, that particular population in jail came from a time when 20% of the births in this country were to mothers who were very low-income mothers. And one of the things we know from studies is that the working mothers tend to read to their children between birth and kindergarten 1,700 hours. So that's an amount of time, and those children have large vocabularies. And at the top end of the continuum, we've actually got the smartest kids in this country we've ever had. We're becoming very bipolar, the highest SAT scores in the history of the country, because all these kids are getting all that brain exercise at an early age. So the average mother is reading 1,700 hours, and the average low-income mother at the other end of the continuum is reading to their children between birth and kindergarten less than 30 hours. So that's the difference, 1,700 to 30. And 2/3 of the families on the low-income side do not have one single book in their home. And so we need to change that trajectory. And we're on a stage now, 20% of the mothers were low income when the current set of people who were in jail was in jail. Last year, 51% of the births in California were to Medi-Cal mothers. So we've gone from a position where we had significant difficulties to a position where we could have really, really, really serious problems going forward. And we can change that trajectory, we can change that future if we can help all of these parents and all of their families and all of the communities understand that if you exercise the brain of these children at that age, it changes their life. They're going to not drop out of school. They're going to do well. They're going to graduate. They're going to go forward into a different life. And if you don't, the kids are on a path where they're not going to do well. And we need to cut the number of kids who are on the wrong path, and we need to do that by helping all of the parents and all of the families both understand this and then and do what they can do in each family setting, because parenting is the key tool that we have to use for this. And then in addition to that, we have to have support where support is needed for the families who need support. So we need that combination. We cannot let this country go down the path where we have twice as many people in jail. We have an increasing number of people who are illiterate. And at one end of the continuum, we have an increasing number of people who are brilliant, and the other end of the continuum, we have an increasing number illiterate. That's a real bipolarity that would be just fatal for the country and have all kinds of negative implications going forward. So we need to get on this agenda. We need to work right now on these issues, and the time to do that work is now. The Bay Area Council has been working on how do we get this message out to people. How can we communicate to the families? How can we communicate to the community? How can we get people to create surround sound on this issue so that when the mothers and grandmothers and friends and neighbors know these issues, they can talk and share with their neighbors who are parents. So how do we get to the parents, and how do we get to the parents indirectly, and how do we get to the entire community? And so the Bay Area Council is doing some work along these lines. as his first 5. And the Goodby Silverson people, who are brilliant, brilliant ad people, who did the Got Milk campaigns and many other award-winning campaigns, fell in love with this issue and contributed their expertise. And we had a chance to meet with their leadership and their key staff, and they said, this is a really incredible opportunity for us to make a difference in changing the entire lives. And before I go to the ads, I want to say to everyone in this room, any family who has a young child that you can communicate this to is a family whose life you can change forever. Because when those neurons develop, they stay connected. And if they don't get developed, that doesn't happen. So if you can talk to one mother and help that one mother understand this, and help that one family understand this, and have them read and talk and sing to their kids, 30 minutes a day of reading, 20 questions a day, read, talk, sing to their kids, you can change the life of each child forever, and each child you save is a child you save. Each child you save is a life you change forever. So people in this room can change people's lives. You just need to get to people and get that information to them in a way that causes them to know this and then to move forward. So I make that as a recommendation. And then I'm going to ask that there's an ad campaign that's going to happen. There's already a First 5 ad campaign that's aimed at doing some of this work. This is the ad campaign from the Bay Area Council. It's very supplementary and complementary to that campaign, but it's going to be accompanied by a whole series of other efforts, by subway materials, by bus stop materials, by posters, and by billboards. And the whole point is to get surround sound out there so that the new norm is that everybody understands this issue. And we need to go from no one understanding it to having everyone understand it, because we need a collective public health agenda around this, that when everyone understands it, everyone is working together to make this happen for all of the kids who are the next generations of this country. So with that, you're about to see some really fun ads. Roll the ads.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. The other night, dear, while I lay sleeping, I dreamt I held you in my arms. De colores se visten los campos en la primavera. De colores son los pajaritos que vienen de afuera. De colores es el arco iris que vemos lucir.
What are you eating? Is it round?
No.
What else is round?
No.
Is the sun round? Is Daddy's head round? Are you gonna eat all those? You're growing up so fast. So what are we gonna do today?
¿Qué estás comiendo? ¿Es redondo? ¿Qué otra cosa es redonda? ¿El sol es redondo? ¿La cabeza de mami es redonda? ¿Te vas a comer todos esos? Mírate, comiendo como toda una niña grande. ¡Qué bien! Has comido todo. Eres mi pequeña preciosa.
Good night, clocks, and good night, socks. Good night, little house, and good night, mouse. Good night, comb, and good night, brush. Good night, nobody. Good night, mush. And good night to the old lady whispering, hush. Good night, stars. good night air, good night noises everywhere.
So having seen those beautiful babies learning, I mean, the big question for me is, I'm a scientist and we've known about this for a long time. What can we actually do to have it make a difference? What can we do to translate? And you'd think that this was literally motherhood. This is a story about children. What do we need to do to actually translate it into action?
Well, I think
Jim?
the biggest thing I would say is, first of all, it's great to have the business community here focus on this, but the truth is, if you look at the state of kids in America, they're the poorest in America. This is true in the Bay Area and all across the country. And over the past few decades, we've neglected some of the most obvious solutions that you just said. I mean, we know that, because we haven't invested enough in our kids. So for the business leadership in the Bay Area Council to get behind this campaign and a broader campaign behind kids couldn't be more timely and more important. This is really basic stuff here, guys. Everybody who's a parent or a grandparent or knows anything about kids knows that if we give them the right start in life, they have a chance, as George said it beautifully, to succeed. So you guys can do a lot about this. One, this is going to be a Bay Area-wide campaign. The children's hospitals are involved. A lot of the Kaiser, a lot of the businesses that you guys represent can be involved. You can help spread this message out there. And as we heard, a lot of parents don't know this. I think the other thing, though, is that all of us can focus over the next few years in not just bridging the word gap. You heard that. 30 million, from an affluent family like mine, the kids hear 30 million more words than in a low-income family, and by the age of 4, they know twice as many words. Okay, we can all, through a campaign like this and some of the other activities we have, fundamentally change that. We can also, by the way, go to Jerry Brown right now, who just put his May budget revise out today, and insist that there are $900 million or $1 billion in there for early childhood education, which also ties into this. So I would say you guys can support it through distribution. You can get involved in this in a big way under the leadership of the Bay Area Council, but we can also hold Jerry Brown and the leaders of this state to the feet to the fire to make sure we invest in all this. If we do that, some of the data that George was saying that we're hearing in the earlier presentation can be turned around relatively quickly, but it's all up to us. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah. George, do you have?
Yeah, a quick comment. One of the big obstacles to progress has been that no one knows the science. Even the scientists know the science. And I actually did some work on this 15 years ago with some of the early studies. I mean, this is not absolutely new science. It is new to parents. Yeah. And it's new to the educational world, and it is new to healthcare. And so there are people in healthcare, I've talked to pediatricians, I've talked to obstetricians, who don't know the science and don't know the importance of the first 3 years. And so they're not telling the mothers, the obstetricians, when they're talking about their birth, they're basically saying, you need to give your children vitamins, you need to give them healthy food, you need to keep them away from poison, you do all of those kinds of things. And they don't say, you need to exercise their brain. And because they don't say that, the mothers don't know it. And the mothers aren't doing any of that to any way disadvantage their children. They love their children deeply. And the mothers who get it can change the lives of their children entirely. But we've done an incredibly bad job of sharing this science in a way that's actionable. And that's why we're trying to make it talk, read, sing. We're trying to get it into very, very actionable thing. It's not, the 30 million word data point is really important. It's a data point. The difference between 30 million words, hearing 30 million words changes. But you can't go to a mother and say, tell your kid 30 million words. But you can go to a mother and say, you know what, if you talk to your child, ask them 20 questions, and read half an hour a day, you can change your life. And so that's what we need to do. We need to make it a public health campaign based on actionable things. And there hasn't been a public health campaign around this up to now.
Well, you know, one of the examples of this is in my university. We have the best developmental psychology program in the world at Berkeley, and none of us studies anybody over the age of 5. And in our education school, nobody studies anybody under the age of 5. So there's a real disconnect there. But I think it's also worth saying that in order for parents to be able to do that, they have to not be trying to work 3 jobs just to be able to get by. Children need to be in situations that are safe. They need to be in neighborhoods that are that are safe. So we need to have some of that infrastructure there for those parents, I think, as well.
But even with the infrastructure, the problem is you get the infrastructure in place, and if the mothers don't know that they should talk, read, sing, they don't.
Right.
They just have a healthier, happier environment, but they don't talk, read, sing. This talk, read, sing is not intuitively obvious, and it's not something that's in the books. And so the mothers who are highly stressed, there are mothers who are carrying 2 jobs, they've got a really miserable work environment, they've got a tough home environment. Those mothers also don't know this, and if those mothers do know it, then there's a likelihood that they can get a grandmother, they can get an aunt, or they can get a cousin or a friend or a neighbor, they can do other things, but they're not going to create strategies until they understand the opportunity.
But I think that for the audience, you ought to think of it in 2 ways. First of all, you can distribute this message to your employees, to your communities, et cetera. Because we're going to do this broad, too small to fail campaign for several years here in the Bay Area with the Bay Area Council. And we're going to do it across the country, actually. And we're going to do the Talking is Teaching campaign, Talk, Read, Sing, with you guys. And you can distribute that. The other thing, though, is I think George's point, I think the discussion's pointing out is you can also look at the bigger picture here, which is kids really are the most important investment priority. I looked at the different topics we have on the agenda here today, and it's quite a remarkable group of speakers. But nothing's more important than kids, period. Nothing. And all the stuff that we had on there about the economic competitiveness or China, we will not compete with China successfully if we leave half of our kids here in the Bay Area or across the country behind.
And I can mention the vice chairman of education in Beijing came to Berkeley to talk to us about what to do in preschools especially to encourage innovation. And California is a kind of wonderful place for this to happen because the kinds of things that you're seeing as a result of this kind of early learning are exactly the kinds of things that we value. Skills not just of being able to do widgets, but being able to be creative and critical.
And we're at an interesting point because really California has come back. The interesting thing we're dealing with now in Jerry Brown's budget, right, is for the first time the fiscal condition of the state is actually looking pretty good. And so the real issue with Governor Brown is how much are we going to devote to really important investments like early childhood, how much are we going to put away for a rainy day fund and make sure that we have a successful economy over the longer term. But this is a good time. And it's where business leaders like you guys make such a difference. Because on the one hand, you can take this message and you can distribute it to your employees, to your communities, et cetera. And all of you have different ways in which you can do that. But on the other hand, you can become probably the most important advocates for kids that the Bay Area and the state can have. Because that's really who people listen to. So if you join in this with us and you do the pieces that you can do, and each of you can do it differently depending on what company you represent, then this can be a fundamental change, not just for the 0 to 3 kids and changing this word gap and dealing with it, because it's simple. I would say, since we've been talking about brains, it's a no-brainer. But the other point I would make to you is that we as a community and you as business leaders have to make kids our top priority. And we have to do it not just today and not just this week, but over the next 5 years. And if we do that, then all of the other issues that are on the agenda today will look a lot better from the standpoint of the Bay Area and California and, quite frankly, our country.
And the time to do it is now. And the first place to do it is with your own family.
Yep.
If you're having kids, if you've got family members having kids, if you've got cousins and relatives, share this information with all of them and share it quickly, because if you start today and interact with the child today, you can make 1 million neuron connections today. The numbers are staggering, and the ones that you make will stick. And then look about how can you do this from a community perspective, how can you do it more broadly, and then moving upstream, how can we do this and support this from a program perspective so that the mothers who want to do this have books and they have infrastructure and they have support. And we need to think of it as layers, and we also need to think of it as immediate, because every child we save today is a child whose life is different from today on.
Let me add, one of the real issues we've talked about, people have been talking about inequality here. We have much more dramatic inequality for tiny babies than we do for any other, than we do for
kids.
Group. That's right.
That's all you need to know. The poorest segment is kids.
And right now, 75% of the children in California are reading below grade level. So we're third worst in the country right now in terms of and if we were to exercise those children's brains, we could go from the bottom of that pile to the top very quickly. And we know how to go there. But only a few of us know how to go there. And the problem is most of the people in this room, this is a room full of very smart people, active people, smart people, well-educated people, and I'd be willing to bet that most of the people in this room did not know most of the science we've just discussed. And so if you don't know it, how can the young mothers know it? And how can your own families know it? So we have to get this information out. We have to make it a public health agenda and make it a collective wisdom that this is the good science and this is the right thing to do.
Okay, well, thank you both so
Our
much.
pleasure.
Those
Thank
are
you guys for
inspiring
coming.
words, and thank you all very much. Thank you all very much for being here and being engaged with us and listening.
And Jim and the Bay Area Council, thank you guys for your
Yes,
leadership
and-
on that. It's a big deal.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
great-
you for
great
making this
job,
part
Jim.
making this part of the agenda.